For you, Mr. Chair, it is 4 p.m. If you don't mind, we will begin live streaming this event. Okay, I can confirm that the live stream and recording has commenced. You may begin your meeting.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a hybrid hearing of the Committee of Adjustment for the Town of Pelham. Everyone present and viewing at home via live stream will be given an opportunity to comment on the applications being heard. Agencies commenting on applications may request that certain conditions be imposed should an application be approved. Voicing objections to these conditions will not adversely affect the committee's decision. The purpose of the application and relative correspondence will be heard, following which the applicant will be given the opportunity to address the application. During the public portion of each application, we will hear from anyone wishing to submit verbal comments or submit a written comment via email to clerks@pelham.ca. Sorry. Comments received following the public portion will not be considered. At the conclusion of the discussion, the committee will render a decision and advise of any applicable conditions. Specific wording for conditions may be determined by the committee following the hearing. Copies of decisions will be mailed to the applicant, agent, and members of the public that have submitted comments. Notices of decision can also be obtained by request through the Secretary Treasurer. Committee members are asked to raise your hand if you would like to speak and vote. Applicants, agents, and attendees are advised that they are free to leave the webinar hearing once a decision has been made on their application. Committee members, I am looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
I can do that
Okay.
motion.
And a seconder.
I'll second that.
Okay. Hand raising for, sorry, so I call the vote and we're good to go. Does any member of the panel, does any member on this panel have is it pecuniary interest in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act in any of the applications to be considered at this hearing? No one here.
I do not.
I do not.
And I also do not. There we go. Yeah, Ms. Secretary Treasurer, are there any requests or withdrawal or adjournments?
Through Mr. Chair, there has not. However, before we proceed, I will just read the land acknowledgement statement into the record. We begin this meeting by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and the friendship of the Indigenous people. Through Mr. Chair, you may proceed.
So the first application this afternoon is actually further down on our agenda, so we will be moving it up. It's B5/2023P 26 Chestnut Street.
Sorry, through Mr. Chair, we are actually going to begin with A10 2671 Maple Avenue.
Okay.
I do apologize to everyone in the room. Our video in the room is not working right now, but all the presentations tonight will be read into the record. So our first application is A10/2023P 2671 Maple Avenue. The Town of Pelham is holding hybrid Committee of Adjustment hearings. A hybrid hearing involves a mixture of in-person and remote attendance or participation. The following presentations are based upon the Town of Pelham's Planning Department report and analysis, and no decisions have been made prior to this public hearing. All comments received from commenting agencies and the public have been forwarded in full to the Committee of Adjustment members for their consideration and will be summarized on the slides to follow. Participants are reminded that if you are participating virtually or watching by live stream, and inappropriate language will not be tolerated. The Zoom chat will be monitored. The Zoom chat is not monitored nor recommended to contact the clerk's department. If you would like to contact us during the public portion of the hearing, please do so by emailing clerks@pelham.ca. The email address will be monitored during the public portion. Decorum. The Committee of Adjustment is a formal public hearing requiring decorum. This means that all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak virtually or participating in person, you will be given an opportunity to address the committee at the public portion. If you're live streaming and wish to submit a comment live, please do so through clerks@pelham.ca. Please note that all comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting. Otherwise, they will not be considered. Inappropriate comments will also not be tolerated. If decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons asked to leave. Public portion of the meeting. To allow for an efficient meeting, each member of the public will be given an opportunity to speak to the committee during the public portion of the meeting. After all members of the public have been given the opportunity to speak, the applicant and/or agent will address the public comments and concerns at one time. As I said, our first application this afternoon is A10-2761 Maple Street. The subject land is located on the east side of Maple Street, known locally as 2761 Maple Street. The application seeks relief from section 5.2.3 minimum interior side yard to permit a southerly interior side yard setback of 3 meters, whereas 8 meters is required. To date, the following comments have been received from the Building Division: see conditions. Public Works Department: see conditions. 2755 Maple Street cannot use the driveway of 2761 Maple Street for access. Region of Niagara: no objections to the proposed variance as it is consistent with the PPS and conforms to provincial and regional plans. Also see conditions. And PCA: no objections to the proposed variance. No public comments were received at the time of writing this report. Application for minor variance for tests. First test is the variance minor in nature. Yes, the site maintains a generous amenity area and side yard separation between the abutting property. Test number 2 is the variance desirable for the development or use of the land. Yes, the requested variance is not anticipated to have significant negative impact on the streetscape or adjacent properties. The application proposes a built form that is similar in character to the surrounding properties and utilizes the developable area identified, ensuring that natural heritage features on site remain protected. Test 3, does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? Yes, the intent of the interior side yard setback is to ensure separation distance between the abutting residential uses and to ensure there remains adequate amenity area for the lot in question. The property will maintain a generous side yard amenity space. Test 4, does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the official plan? Yes, the requested variance is not considered to have significant impacts with the context of the official plan. The reduction in side yard setback will permit the development to occur outside of any natural heritage features on site. Planning staff are of the opinion the proposal makes efficient use of the land, will not result in the overbuilding of the property, will not alter the view, sightlines, or personal enjoyment of the subject property or any neighboring properties, and should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regard to land use and compatibility, traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. Planning staff recommend that application A10 be approved, subject to the following conditions: that the applicant apply for and receive a building permit for the construction of a single detached dwelling and attached garage. The applicant obtain a driveway entrance and culvert permit from the Public Works Department for construction of all new or modification of existing driveways or entrances. That the applicant submit an acknowledgement letter advising of the entry of the archaeological assessment report in the provincial registry from the Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism to the satisfaction of the Region of Niagara. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the Secretary Treasurer in writing as soon as possible. Sarah Leach, Secretary Treasurer to the Committee of Adjustment, 20 Pelham Town Square, PO Box 400, and my email is sleach@pelham.ca. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, you may proceed. So just before we get to that, we do have the opportunity for the representation to make any verbal comments. I'm not sure if we have the agent or the applicant with us this evening. Doesn't appear so. So we will move on to the public comments, and we do not have any pre-registered speakers from the public. However, I will open it to the gallery. If there's anyone present that would like to make verbal comments, now would be the time to do so. Not seeing any, Mr. Chair. I will just check the Pelham email address to make sure we've received no comments live. And we have not. So I can confirm it is 4:12 p.m. You may close the public portion of the meeting and move on to committee input.
No, I have no questions. I can make a motion if you're looking for that.
Okay, yes, why don't you go ahead and make a motion, Brenda?
Application A10, 2023-2761 Maple Street in the town of Pelham. Application is made for minor variance of an interior side yard of 3 meters. The application is granted. The variance is minor in nature as the site maintains generous amenity area and separation between abutting properties. The intent of the zoning bylaw is maintained. The intent of the official plan is maintained. The proposal is desirable for the land as it facilitates a built form that is similar in character to surrounding properties, and it also ensures existing natural heritage features remain protected. This application is granted without prejudice to any other application in the town of Pelham. The Committee of Adjustment considered the written and oral recommendation and agrees with the minor variance report analysis and recommendation that this application meets the Planning Act test for minor variance. There's 3 conditions. Number 1, a building permit. Number 2, an acknowledgement letter refiling of an archaeological assessment be submitted to the region. And number 3, driveway and culvert permit for the creation or modification of a driveway.
Hey. Do I have a second? So it has been granted. We should vote at this point.
I'll second that.
Okay. So the application has passed.
Oh, through Mr. Chair, I would just be looking for a vote, please.
Okay. Yes, yes, all 3 of us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Through Mr. Chair, that does bring us to our next application being B6/2023P. Just allow me one moment to share my screen. Application for consent B6/2023P 1553 Pelham Street. The subject parcel is shown as part 2 on the sketch and has a frontage of 10.04 meters on the east side of Pelham Street. The property was previously subject to a zoning bylaw amendment AM 09/2021. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and consent to convey 402.2 meters square of land, being part 2, to create a lot line and establish legal ownership of each individual unit. Part 1 is to be retained for continued residential use. To date, the following comments have been received. From the Building Division, no comments or concerns. Public Works, no comments or concerns. And no public comments were received at the time of writing the report. Planning staff is of the opinion that the proposal is an ideal application of current planning and development goals and is a great example of gentle residential intensification within an existing neighborhood, which will have virtually no impact on adjacent land uses. In planning staff's opinion, the application is consistent with the PPS and conforms to the provincial, regional, and local plans. Planning staff recommends that application number B6/2022/2023P be approved subject to the following condition. That the applicant provide the Secretary Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject parcel, together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for use in the issuance of the certificate of consent. And that the applicant provide a final certification fee of $423 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions of consent shall be borne by the applicant. And if you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact myself via email if it's preferable, sleech@pelham.ca. This contact information is also available on the town's website. Through you, Mr. Chair, I do believe that we have the representation with us, the agent, Mr. Ethan Lamont. And Ethan, if you could just press the red on button to speak. Thank you.
Sure. Good evening, committee members. My name is Ethan Lamont, Junior Planner with Upper Canada Consultants. I don't have anything to add. I support staff's recommendation. I'm just here to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Any questions, guys, on our side?
No, I have no questions. Thank you.
I also have no questions.
And through you, Mr. Chair, we did not have any pre-registered members to speak on this application this evening. I will just confirm that we've received no emails. And it is 4:17 PM, and I can confirm that we can close the public portion. And, oh, sorry, is there anyone from the floor that would
Yes.
wish to speak on this application?
No.
Okay, seeing none, it is 4:17 PM and you may close the public portion.
Okay. Let's see here.
Motion, if you like, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
With regards to file B6/2023P 1553 Pelham Street, Pelham. The application for consent for partial discharge of mortgage and convey part 2. I move that we grant this. The above, this decision based on the following conditions. To the satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer, provide the Secretary Treasurer with a registrable legal description, a copy of the deposited reference plan, and the final certification fee of $423 be provided. This motion is based on the following reasons. The application conforms to and complies with the town official plan, regional policy plan, and provincial policy statement and town zoning bylaw. This motion is rendered having regard to sections 51/24 and 51/25 of the Planning Act. In making this motion, the committee considered all written and oral submissions and finds that subject to the conditions, this application meets Planning Act criteria, is consistent and complies with provincial and regional town planning policy.
Okay, we'll put that to a vote. How does
I can
everyone-
second that motion.
Sure. Thanks. All right. And we'll put that to a vote now on the committee. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Motion passed.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, that does bring us to our next application, which is B5/2023P, consent for 26 Chestnut Street. And I will go ahead with my presentation. Okay. File B5/2023P, 26 Chestnut Street. The subject parcel being part 1 on the sketch is known locally as 26 Chestnut Street. Application is made for consent to partial discharge of mortgage and consent to convey 352 square meters of land being part 1 for future construction of a single detached dwelling. Part 2 is to be retained for continued residential use of the dwelling known municipally as 26 Chestnut Street. To date, the following comments have been received. From the building department, no comments. Public Works. No side yard walkways that impede side yard swales shall be permitted. Each lot is to be individually serviced with water and sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with Town of Pelham engineering standards. As well, see conditions. 5 public comments were received at the time of writing the report. The comments are included in full on the public agenda and summarized as follows. Oppose the consent and the variances. Suggested that a second dwelling unit would be more appropriate for the site. Concerns related to negative impacts of reduced lot area, setbacks, and coverage. Negative impacts on the character of neighborhood, compatibility related to the overbuild of the site. Concerns related to the scale of the proposed dwelling, privacy and outlook on neighbors' properties. Number of variances do not respect the intent of the zoning bylaw. Additional concerns related to scale and density, intensification of the surrounding area, that the proposal does not meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act. The retained lot will not maintain a carport or private garage. Snow storage and potential impacts on neighboring properties and integrity of existing cedars and fence. Light and noise impacts, impacts on the heritage/character of the surrounding neighborhood, as well as concerns to it being precedent setting. Additional concerns related to character and compatibility of the proposal with the surrounding neighborhood. Variances associated with the consent are not minor. Removal of trees, traffic impacts on Hurricane Road, character and stability of the existing neighborhood, concerns related to parking on a public road, and drainage along Hurricane Road. Planning staff are the opinion that the proposed consent is consistent with the PPS and conforms to the provincial, regional, and local plans. The resulting parcel will comply with applicable zoning bylaw regulations upon the granting of concurrent minor variance applications and is not anticipated to negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with respect to traffic, privacy, and stormwater management. Planning staff recommends that the application number B5 be approved, subject to the following. That the applicant submit a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan for all parcels, demonstrating that the drainage neither relies nor negatively impacts neighboring properties, and that all drainage will be contained within the respective lots to the satisfaction of Public Works. That the applicant confirm no existing utilities cross the proposed new property line. Should any services cross this new property line, the applicant would be responsible for costs associated. Obtain approval for a driveway and entrance culvert permit as applicable issued through Public Works to town standards. The applicant should also bear all costs associated with these works. Conduct a stage 1 to 2 archaeological assessment prepared by a licensed archaeologist and receive clearance from the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism, and Culture. At a minimum, the assessment must cover the building envelope of the proposed lot eligible for disturbance and be accepted by the ministry prior to clearance of all conditions. The licensed archaeologist may recommend further archaeological analysis or preservation steps be taken. No demolition, grading, or other soil disturbance shall take place on the subject land prior to the issuance of a ministry letter confirming that all archaeological resource concerns have been mitigated and meet licensing and resource conservation requirements. That the applicant provide the Secretary Treasurer with the registrable legal description of the subject parcel together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for use in the issuance of the certificate of consent. And the applicant provide a final certification fee of $423 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. All costs associated with fulfilling such conditions shall be borne by the applicant. And again, if there's anyone here that would like to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please email me at sleach@pelham.ca. And please note that if you did submit written comments or registered to speak, I have automatically signed you up for this. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do believe we have the representation with us, Mr. Curtis Thompson.
Good afternoon, committee and town staff. I'm Curtis Thompson. I'm a registered professional planner with Better Neighborhoods Development Consultants out of St. Catharines. I'm representing the owner of the lands at 26 Chestnut Street. Just bear with me here while I try and go full screen. The subject lands are located at the southwest corner of Chestnut Street and Hurricane Road in North Fawn Hill, just east of Pelham Street. The property is surrounded by a variety of residential land uses of different eras, including townhouses, single detached predominantly, a couple multi-units, and some apartment buildings on Pelham Street on the west side. The proposed severance looks to sever off the rear yard of 26 Chestnut Street, maintain the footprint of the existing garage, and relocate the existing shed from the severed lands to the retained lands to serve the existing house. There are some other site works that are proposed, including removal of a good chunk of the existing driveway and restoration of part of that driveway on the retained lands for landscaping to help improve the rear yard amenity area for that property. Here's a copy of the site plan that was submitted with the application. It shows the proposed building envelope, driveway and parking area and yards for the new lot, as well as the reconfigured lands on the retained parcel. With the proposed application, no trees or fences are proposed to be removed along the west lot line. One of the reasons for that is the fact that the driveway would be flanking the west lot line, which helps eliminate any prospective deep excavation and overdig for a full basement foundation for the new house. It also helps provide additional spatial separation from the lands to the west. No large trees on the town boulevard are anticipated to be removed. There may be one small tree that's in the way that our client has committed to trying to relocate, potentially with spading. And there is a utility pole where the proposed driveway is that would need to be relocated at the applicant's expense to the satisfaction of Hydro and the town. As mentioned, on the retained lot, the applicant would be removing or restoring part of the existing driveway, removing a small back room addition off the wall that would be encroaching on the new lot line. And that is of which that would be considered the rear yard setback of the retained parcel. That setback reduction, seemingly dramatic, is more technical in nature, and that's given the orientation of the existing house, where it's positioned on the property. That's the rear yard. In this case, the interior side yard would be functioning as the rear yard as well. And the exterior side yard, which is quite large and is already fenced in, provides the overwhelming majority of the private amenity area. Although it's possible that the lot line be shifted, would be a bit more contrived to comply with the lot area that's being requested to be reduced by 10 square meters on the new lot. In my opinion, it's better to seek a minor reduction in the lot area to help preserve the existing house versus sending it to the landfill, potentially making the project unfeasible simply to comply with the minimum lot area with contrived lot geometry. I should have this slide up. So to facilitate the severance, there's there's two minor variance applications that are being requested. As I mentioned, the rear yard setback reduction on the retained lot would be required for the severance, as well as the minimum lot area reduction from 360 square meters to 350 square meters on the new lot. The other zoning provision that has been requested is an increase in the accessory building lot coverage on the severed lands. And that is in response to the existing garage footprint that's there, and the applicant's desire to provide a small addition off the front to improve its dimensions so a car could actually fit inside given its configuration. That variance is not necessarily required to facilitate the severance, although in my opinion, it's a desirable minor variance for the reasons I mentioned about preserving that garage. And that garage has not apparently been posing any adverse impacts to the neighborhood, as staff also mentioned in their report. This slide shows a perspective rendering of the proposed dwelling footprint as seen from Hurricane Road. It's a pedestrian-oriented design. Thanks to the town's new zoning bylaw, it requires the building to interface a bit better with the street, and the existing garage in the rear yard helps subordinate that auto-dominated streetscape by not having a blank facing garage door address the public realm. The building has human scaled proportions, a nice prominent front entry, and a proper window and door alignment with good proportions and nice simple cladding arrangements. The proposed development site is located in a very walkable neighborhood. It's about 600 meters north of downtown Fonthill. And it's about a kilometer to the bulk of the commercial business area on Highway 20 East, just east of Station Street. This positions it in a quite admirable area of being in a walkable neighborhood, close to public service facilities, schools, parks, businesses, things of that sort that can be accessed easily by foot. The town's official plan has a variety of policies that speak to the need to more responsibly intensify our land area through infill development, which is inherently more sustainable than exurban greenfield sprawl. And that's because we've got existing infrastructure in the ground, existing public service facilities, institutions, and businesses nearby. It helps improve the business vitality of the existing community by providing additional residents in immediate proximity and without unnecessarily expanding public infrastructure and maintenance obligations. The official plan also speaks a lot to the need for new development to be sensitive and compatible with existing neighborhoods. In my opinion, the proposed severance application paired with the preliminary elevation plans that my client has commissioned are fundamentally compatible in nature and scale with the existing neighborhood, which in my opinion is defined by a variety of architectural vernaculars and buildings constructed in different eras, modest two-story house. And the rear yard, although it might seem small on the site plan, it's entirely functional, and a lot of people don't require large backyards to put swimming pools in. They're quite content with a little backyard area for a barbecue, patio, and seating area. The town's new zoning bylaw was recently adopted, which had eliminated a lot of the zoning requests that were in the original submission. So I won't go over those again. Lot area and rear yard setback are the ones that are required to facilitate this severance application. A number of public comments came in, and I'll try and go through a few of them here. Some of the neighbors were upset about cars parking on both sides of the street and how that narrows the carriageway and can cause speeding traffic. However, cars parked on the side of the street have actually been shown to help slow the speed of traffic down, as they provide peripheral edge friction and cause for concern. So having cars parked on the street or other vertical obstructions actually helps slow the speed of traffic. And I understand Hurricane Road has been a problem road for speeding for quite some time in the town. The one new dwelling unit's not anticipated to increase the parking demand in the area, considering the stall yield that the proposed site plan is providing. It will diminish the character, charm, and enjoyment of the neighborhood. In my opinion, the proposed development would positively impact the character of the neighborhood, given the lot geometry, site planning, and preliminary architectural designs. The surrounding area is characterized, like I said, by a variety of styles and vintages, and diversity and a variety in lot sizes is not necessarily a bad thing. There's not enough space to build a house, and it's too close to the property line. All the required building setbacks for the proposed dwelling are now being complied with. As I mentioned, the only yard setback that's being required is to preserve the existing house. And the proposed driveway serving the detached garage is along the western lot line, which helps buffer the adjacent dwelling at 1585 Pelham Street from the future house. And the proposed wall-to-wall is about 25 meters to that dwelling, which is almost the full depth of a traditional lot. As I mentioned, there's no anticipated tree removal or fence removal on that west lot line. And one of the concerns was that there's not enough green space on the lands. Although we're asking to increase the maximum accessory building lot coverage on the new lot, we are complying with the overall lot coverage for the severed parcel as well as the retained parcel. So on the whole, there's the lot coverage is being complied with. There's concerns about poor drainage on Hurricane Road and concerns over drainage impacts to the other lands. Our client has already commissioned engineered lot grading and drainage plan, and this plan is also required as a condition of approval by the town. It would also be required at the time of building permit issuance to the town's satisfaction. So we're not concerned that any outstanding issues on the engineered lot grading and drainage plan can be polished and refined to suit the town's needs to facilitate the severance. And the town recently installed a brand new storm sewer on Hurricane Road with catch basins flanking the property, which likely would be on the receiving end of the overland flow routes on the subject property. The neighborhood has uniform lots and yards. This is not completely true. Lot sizes in the surrounding area range from 400 square meters to over 6,000 square meters. The proposed lot is on the small end of the spectrum, but the proposed site plan is clearly functional with practical building envelopes, landscaping, parking, and a demonstration of amenity area. The rear yard setback reduction on the retained lot will provide inadequate backyard amenity space. As I mentioned, this rear yard reduction is technical in nature, given the orientation of that house. There's a large exterior side yard area, which is fenced in, which provides the bulk of the amenity area, as well as the restored driveway, which will be landscaped on the interior side to supplement that. And lastly, the development is bad for the environment. In my opinion, this is unsubstantiated. Infill housing development has actually been proven to be one of the most environmentally sustainable things. According to some recent studies that were done in California, looking at North American cities, infill housing developments are shown to have residents that drive considerably less vehicle miles traveled, and vehicle miles traveled, as most of us would know, are one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions of the committee.
Thank you.
Before we move on to the public portion, if the committee has any questions for the agent, you may proceed with that.
I have a question I'd like to just throw out there up the bat. I noticed on the west property line, you kept it to a meter, and that's just because of the existing garage building that's there. And so you've run the driveway from there, right? It's slightly off, kind of what's required. Other than that, those trees are they right on the property line? Because although I drove by, I couldn't exactly tell where the trees were. Were they right on the property line as they are in the diagram?
Through the chair. So according to the topographic survey, some of them appear to be hugging the property line. Some of them may be on my client's property. I'm sure the owner of the subject lands and the neighboring property owner would also have a better idea of exactly where they fall in regards to the fence. But given the 1 meter setback of that driveway and the existing garage and the house hugging the east, there wouldn't be any considerable overdig that would be caused from a foundation excavation that would likely harm that. The driveway is going to be getting scraped down, asphalt, concrete driveway like a foot. So we're not anticipating any tree removal there, and certainly not on the neighbor's property.
Yeah, it wasn't so much more about the removal, it's just like, where are they? Because, diagrams can make things look exactly perfect. And then, the actual property can look a lot different. So if that's the case, that answers my question. Thank you.
So they are on there.
Any other questions at this point?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, it might just be my lack of familiarity with some of the terms. You'd said that no setback variances were going to be required, but there is the one that I note here, reduction to 1.2 meters from 7.5 meter. Is that not a setback as I understand it, or do I have my terms mixed up?
Through the chair, no, that's correct. What I was getting at was there's no setbacks being requested or are required for reduction on the new lot. So that setback pertains to the retained lot. the existing house.
Yes, Brenda?
So sorry, I have a question. So if you were to demolish the existing house and demolish the garage, therefore you would change the lot line, would you require any variances?
Through the chair, if that were to be the case, it's unlikely we would need any zoning relief. The lot line would likely shift to the right. The garage potentially could be an attached garage. But I mean, this is the existing context, so it's kind of the cards that we're dealing with. Even picking up and relocating that house would be, could be the order of 6 figures plus the new foundation, removal of the old foundation. So would likely completely skew the numbers, whether or not it's a feasible project. So in this case, pulling that lot line over just to reduce the lot area on the new property by 10 square meters is the wisest choice, in my opinion.
Through Mr. Chair, if there's no more questions at this time, we will move on to the public portion of the hearing. We do have pre-registered members of the public this evening, and we will hear those who have pre-registered prior to opening up to the floor. I would just like to remind the speakers that we are currently just considering the consent file only. If this file is approved, we will move on to the variances. So at this time, we're just dealing with comments related to the consent file. So our first public speaker is David Drago. And if you could, on the microphone, there's just a little on button. The microphone will turn red, and that means you are live. Yeah, perfect.
May I close the laptop? Then I will. So regarding the application for consent under file number B5 2023P 26 Chestnut Street. Good afternoon. My name is David Drago. My wife, Mary Jo, and I are owners and occupants of 1585 Pelham Street, the property directly west of and abutting the subject land known as 26 Chestnut Street. We purchased our property in 1990, and it remains our first and only home for these 33 years. I trust that you have received and carefully reviewed my written comments concerning the application for consent under file B5 2023P. I thank you for affording me the opportunity to address you today. In its guidelines for submitting an application for consent, the town of Pelham states, the Committee of Adjustment is the approval authority. Approval is based on the application's compliance with matters outlined in the Planning Act, Provincial Policy Statement, Greenbelt Plan, Growth Plan, Regional Official Plan, and the Town of Pelham Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw. Furthermore, the Committee of Adjustment must consider several legislative provisions, and all planning matters must be consistent with provincial policy statements and shall conform with provincial plans that are in effect. And finally, division of land in the town of Pelham and throughout Ontario is highly regulated by restrictive local, regional, and provincial planning policies. It is to you, the members of the Committee of Adjustment, as the approval authority, that I address my opposition to the application for consent under file number B5 2023P and opposition to the Town of Pelham planning recommendation concerning this file. I base my opposition on the following. First, the application for consent is in violation of the foundational clause in the Town of Pelham's comprehensive zoning bylaw concerning section 1.3B, the application of the bylaw, which specifically states, quote, "No person other than a public authority shall reduce any lot by conveyance or otherwise so that it does not meet the requirements of the bylaw. Or if it did not meet the requirements initially, that it is further from meeting them." The application for this consent demands a reduction or alteration of each and every requirement for residential zone 2. The application seeks to reduce the requirements for minimum lot area, to exceed the maximum lot coverage for accessory uses, and to reduce minimum rear yard requirements to nearly zero. It is important to state that these are the standard requirements for every residential zone in the town of Pelham. Therefore, if the application for consent is granted on the basis of the planning recommendation, then the Town of Pelham Planning Department will have introduced a property that is not consistent with any of the residential zones in the town of Pelham. The properties at 26 Chestnut Street and the proposed lot at 2 Hurricane Road will exist in a hybrid zone, neither conforming to R1, R2, or R3 requirements. I gained further understanding of how it could come to this in a meeting with Barbara Weens and Lindsay Richardson on Wednesday, April 26th at 2 p.m. In this meeting, I was informed of the following in response to my questions concerning this application for consent. First, I was told that the reason for minor variances is to allow for changes to the application of the bylaw as set forth in section 1.3B concerning the reduction of requirements. I argue thus, why is section 1.3B in the bylaw if it ultimately has no authority? Secondly, I was informed that regardless of the percentages and meter requirements listed in these zoning bylaws, that the planning department does not consider the percentages to be relevant. It's not about 10% or 20%. There are no, and I quote, mathematical equations. It's about location and amenity space. I argue then, why does the zoning bylaw state percentages if in the end they are to be arbitrarily determined by the planning department? Thirdly, I was told directly that rear yards doesn't mean rear yards, and that they are not required if there is sufficient amenity space in exterior, interior, and front yards. I argue, why does each zone requirement in the town of Pelham list rear yard minimum requirements of 7.5 meters if it is not required by the planning department? Finally, I do recognize the need and provincial directives for more housing and residential infill. However, I propose that it needs to be done properly and not at the expense of the zoning bylaws. I also commented to the planning director that while we are creating new housing and serving the quote, underserved rental stock, that the town is not creating housing that is affordable as recommended in the Town of Pelham official plan. I point to the development at 4 Hurricane and the Font Hill Yards as examples. My concern was met with the following response. We don't control the markets. To which I responded, how then can the town of Pelham create affordable housing? The answer? Through nonprofit housing, such as Habitat for Humanity. I propose that affordable housing can be created by maintaining the standards of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. In essence, the application for consent could be approved with no changes to zoning requirements. And the construction of a modest one-story single detached dwelling, which would market itself at an affordable price. For these reasons, the application for consent as it stands must be rejected and resubmitted to conform more closely with the comprehensive zoning bylaw 4481/2022. And despite what the planning department recommends, we must follow the Town of Pelham official plan. You, the Committee of Adjustment, are the final authority, not the applicant and its agents, not the Town of Pelham Planning Department. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Through you, Mr. Chair, our second pre-registered member of the public is Mr. Chuck Miller. Mr. Miller, I do believe that the microphone is on, so you may proceed.
Is it necessary to have the laptop here or can I move it off? So
No, it is necessary.
It
Sorry.
isn't.
Yes.
You can just bring the chair over if you like and chair.
there's an idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Charles V. Miller. My wife and Joan and I live at 7 Baker Place, which is off Bigelow, south of Pancake. We've been there for 23 years, so I kind of consider myself part of the community now. Mr. Chairman, as always done in settings and meetings like this through my career, I always start, well, in settings where people don't know me, I always start with a bit of disclosure of my interest in the file and contact with some of the key players in the file. I'll start by saying my wife and I own 29 Chestnut Street. This application is 26 Chestnut Street. We are the southeast corner of Chestnut and Hurricane. This application is the southwest corner. Obviously, we don't live there. We can't live in 2 houses. Maybe we could, but we don't. My daughter and her family live in that house. We bought it last year. I'm a retired municipal planner at the municipal level for some 35 plus years. The last 25 to 30 years in Niagara. During that career, I was always at the local level, like this, providing planning advice and service to local municipalities. I don't know how many reports I've written, Mr. Chairman. I have never done planning work here in Pelham, ever. I don't know any of you sitting on the committee, but I have empathy for the fact you're on it. I know Planning Director Barb Weens simply because we attended a lot of meetings over a number of decades together, but we never worked together. We were in different municipalities. I do not know the other author of the planning report, Lindsay Richardson, except that I met her on this file a couple of weeks ago. And thank you for that. I do not know Planner Thompson, who is here for the applicant. But I guess I should some, because when I was searching information in this file, I turned the page on my computer and found out that you worked here for some time. Till 2021 with Barb. I didn't know that. Maybe that tells you something, Mr. Chairman. When you retire, you try to stay out of following municipal stuff, municipal affairs. However, in this case, I can't. I am not here in a planning consulting role. I don't do that anymore. Rather, I'm here providing input to the proposal as a neighboring property owner. I'll explain that. The house that my daughter lives in which my wife and I own, is right across the street from the Century House, which is located on the subject lot. When my family sits on the front porch of our house, and we're doing that a lot now, we love it there. We look straight west across Chestnut Street, down the exterior side yard that Planner Thompson was referring to, underneath a beautiful canopy of trees. So straight down that exterior side yard. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to repeat the long list of issues which, and boy, I give them a lot of credit, that the neighbors have brought up. I'm not going to repeat them. I agree with some of them. Rather, what I'm going to do in this report is focus on portions of the review and recommendations of the town planning department, which was released last Friday. So guess what I was doing on the weekend? Because quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, I differ on two key matters. And they're not the only matters I'm concerned about, but I have major difference with the planning department recommendation in two key areas. And so I'm going to address those areas. Now, I want to start again by saying, Sarah said, Mr. Chairman, that we're focusing on the consent only, but all of the presentations so far have drifted into all three of these concurrent applications. And that's the way I wrote mine too. So I'm not only going to talk about the consent application in this, I'm going to talk about the three concurrent application, one consent, two minor variants. Okay. And I think that's probably the right way to do it, because when you have concurrent applications like this, each is dependent on the other. So that's how I propose to talk, Mr. Chairman. Now, first of all, in reference to file A7 of 2023, Mr. Chairman, that's the application requesting relief from the zoning bylaw requirement for a minimum rear yard from 23 Chestnut. That's the existing house. Okay. Now, do you have in front of you the severance sketch, et cetera? Because it'll probably help in following this. Okay. Now, specifically, your new zoning bylaw. Congratulations on a new zoning bylaw. In section 6.22, the number doesn't matter, but section 6.22 requires a minimum rear yard of 7.5 meters. 7.5 meters, Mr. Chairman and members. And the relief requested by that variance file is down to 1.2 meters. Now, to understand the implications of and the reason for that request respecting the rear yard, we need to review the total package of what's being proposed here in terms of the severance and the variances. Now, the applicant proposes to sever, and again, I'm referring to the severance sketch here, to sever the entire rear yard at 26 Chestnut, except for 1.2 meters adjacent to back wall, the west wall of the house. The entire rear yard becomes the new lot. To create a new building lot of about, this is important, about 60 feet by 60 feet. I still think in Imperial. Now, frontage for that new lot, that 60 feet, would be under Hurricane. Now, part of that existing rear yard, up adjacent to the house, is the required rear yard from the zoning bylaw. So if you were to draw a line parallel to the west wall of the existing house, the back wall, 7.5 meters westerly, there's your required rear yard by your zoning bylaw. And you'll note, if you do that in your mind, that's a big chunk of the proposed lot. Now, in simplistic terms, Mr. Chairman and committee members, without reduction or elimination of that rear yard requirement, it isn't possible to create a building lot anywhere close to the size required by the new zoning bylaw. That's even the much smaller requirements in the new zoning bylaw. But if you maintain that rear yard requirement, I don't think so. Now, the concurrent applications, there's two variances and a consent. They're like dominoes, Mr. Chairman. They're like dominoes. If the first one falls, they all do. Think about that. So let's address this rear yard. The planning department review, which we all got on Friday, of the proposed rear yard variance application is about halfway through the report. I suspect you read them, but if you want to pull it up, you can, about halfway through. Titled Minor Variance Test and Test Response Explanation. Mr. Chairman and committee members, we're all familiar with the test and what it's about. Okay. The department test response explanation appears to say the mathematical reduction, 7.5 meters to 1.2 meters, isn't the measure to consider. But rather, everything is okay. There's no impact because there's existing landscaped amenity space in the exterior side yard that I said I look at from the front porch of our house. I think that's what they're saying. It's okay because there's amenity space in the exterior side yard. Now, there's a couple other spots too. You'll notice that on the south side, there's a proposal to create a little bit more green space at the end of the driveway. You'll see that on the sketch. Okay. Now, let's talk about rear yards. You know, a rear yard is so much more, Mr. Chairman, members, than just amenity space. You know, over the years in this business, my design colleagues, the guys who do the site plans and do the subdivisions and stuff, they used to smile and sometimes laugh at me when I would describe a rear yard as a breather. Yeah, a breather for the people that live on the property to have some amenity space and sit out back and do what you do in your backyard. But also a significant breather between buildings. Think about that, Mr. Chairman and committee members. A significant breather between buildings. And it's also a place for the natural environment to breathe. Think about that. If you go to our neighborhood to the south of this property, it's an old plan from, well, the late 19th century. Large lots, century houses dotting the streets, and yes, some newer houses from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, but also on large lots. Those rear yards provide building separation for the buildings to breathe. They also allow for the natural environment to breathe and do what it does. And you'll see the results of that in our neighborhood. Now, the product of approving the minor variance that I'm talking about here for the rear yard, in other words, what you get out of the concurrent applications, if they were approved, will be two-story dwellings. And I refer you to the severance and the site plan sketches. Two-story dwellings, the Century Home, 1901, I think, and the new one, separated by a little less than 10 feet. A little less than 10 feet. Wow. Mr. Chairman, that's not a minor change to the bylaw. That's not a matter of adjusting a requirement like this committee is empowered to do. That's not minor. I submit, Mr. Chairman, members, the only group that can make such a significant change to council policy, and that's what zoning requirements are, they're there for a reason, is the council itself. Because this is way beyond your pay scale, way beyond your job description. It's not minor. I won't ask what your pay scale is. Now, council would do that after considering all of the issues of the overall development proposal. And Planner Thompson talked about some of those issues and his opinion about them. There's a bunch of them, including this rear yard. My point is, I don't think in any planning universe that variance application is minor and something this committee can deal with. It's so significant. Remember what I said, two-story dwellings within 10 feet of each other in what's supposed to be the rear yard for the existing house. Remember my comment about breathing? And how would council then make those decisions about the overall development proposal and this rear yard? Well, they'd have to have a site-specific zoning amendment application. You know what? I haven't been involved. I try to stay out of this stuff except when it's right beside me. But in our general neighborhood, there's been a number of site-specific zoning applications and consideration by council. If you look at the zoning schedule that Planner Thompson gave you, you'll see some of them. There are little numbers on them. Those are site-specific rezonings that council dealt with, trying to consider the whole package of issues attached to each of those development proposals. Now, because of that, Mr. Chairman and members, I believe the committee is faced with denying variance application A7 because the relief requested so clearly isn't minor. 10 feet, Mr. Chairman, between buildings. Now, the second key matter I want to address is the proposed consent to sever B5. Okay, now this is the proposal to create the lot. And again, with reference to the severance sketch and proposed site plan, this is the proposal to create the 60-foot by 60-foot lot to build a 2-story dwelling. Now, let's start by saying, since these are concurrent applications and dependent on each other, the discussion about this lot is moot, Mr. Chairman, if the rear yard variance application is denied, which I believe you should be doing. But assuming the rear yard problem wasn't there and vanished, it's interesting to review the lot for compliance with the town's official plan policies for intensification and infill. And those are the words. In this case, it's infill. Now, town planning staff did that in the middle of their report on file B5 under the title Town of Pelham Official Plan. Now, there's a lot in that report from provincial and regional policies and so on. But I think the salient part is the Town of Pelham Official Plan. Now, the council approved official plan, relatively new, includes objectives and policies dealing with intensification and infill in existing developed areas, and that's what we are. Now, in my opinion, the key policy section applying to this proposed lot is policy B113. Again, the numbers don't matter, but I'm going to read it. And this also is in the planning department report if you want to follow along. I'm quoting. Notwithstanding items B and C, and I'm not going to go back to those. The creation of new freehold or vacant condominium and infill lots through the consent process for ground-oriented detached dwellings may be permitted provided the proposed lot and unit type is similar to and compatible with the established character of the street or neighborhood where it is proposed. I'll cherry pick a bit and say that again. The proposed lot and unit type is similar to and compatible with the established character of the street or neighborhood. And it goes on to say, the zoning bylaw shall establish minimum lot area and frontages and minimum and or maximum densities which are considered appropriate within the urban living area designation. Now, I'll go back. We'll have some discussion about that policy. Chairman, the planning department review, which you have, seems to say, and it's difficult sometimes to paraphrase, make it small enough I can talk about it here, because there's an awful lot said in a report like this. But the planning department review seems to say that because the proposed lot conforms or is close to conforming with the lot requirements of the new zoning bylaw, 360 square meters, and because it's intended for a single family dwelling and the generated density, I'm not going to talk about density, but it's what it's talking about. The generated density is acceptable. The lot's good to go. Boy, that's a real paraphrase of what they said, but that's how I summarize it. If you meet the lot area of the new zoning bylaw, or come close, there's a variance attached to that too, a little one. And because it's intended for single family dwelling and the density is acceptable, the lot's okay. But Mr. Chairman and committee members, the council approved policy I just read says so much more. So much more. Mr. Chairman, it says the creation of new freehold lots, infill lots, through the consent process for dwellings may be permitted provided the proposed lot, Mr. Chair, and unit type is similar to and compatible with the established character of the street or neighborhood where it's proposed. Wow, that's a lot more. That policy raises a lot of issues which are really for town council to consider. For example, let's start with, how does that policy apply to this lot? Is it the summary I just said of what the planning department concluded? Meet the lot area of the zoning bylaw, you're good to go, amongst other things. Or is it something much more than that? I see the words meaning much more than that. For example, what is the neighborhood or streetscape the proposed lot and unit type has to be, quote, similar and compatible with? What does that mean? Got to be thought out. Now, it's pretty clear to me, we want to talk about neighborhoods, and I'm going to delve into a policy discussion a bit, which again is really not for this committee, but I'm going to do it to give you an example. It's pretty clear to me that the neighborhood south of Hurricane, now let's south of Hurricane going towards downtown, towards Broad Street, and on both sides of Chestnut and Pelham, both sides, is a product of what I believe is a late 19th century plan of the town. The town at that time in that plan ended where Hurricane Street is now. It had large lots, and because of its age, it's dotted with century homes, just like the one on the subject land and just like the one that Dave Drago lives in on Pelham Street. They were the last lots in that plan. I repeat, that was the end of the village. And because of that, our neighborhood is much different than the neighborhood north of Hurricane, which has developed since the mid-20th century in my lifetime, and looks completely different and feels completely different. So there's a debate that has to be done if we're going to compare what's a compatible, consistent lot with the neighborhood. Well, what do you mean by the neighborhood? And I add to that, the neighborhood which is south of Hurricane probably has historical value overall, both in terms of the building stock and its landscaped areas. Beautiful, beautiful tree canopy everywhere. I'm learning now since my daughter moved in there last year. I'm walking my dog around there all the time. Anyway, my point is that neighborhood is completely different than the neighborhood across the street, which is developed later. That's what happens. That's what happens. So there's some discussion necessary on, well, if the official plan says that a new lot is supposed to be compatible with and sensitive to the existing lot fabric and pattern in the area that it is, there's a debate about what's that neighborhood mean and how do you do a study of it and what do you do to comply with that policy? But I know it's more than just saying you meet the minimum lot size in the zoning bylaw. Mr. Chairman, we're dealing with large lots with historical houses. Dave's is what, 1920, 1910? 1901. Large lots, well-maintained, I think without exception in that old plan. Now, Mr. Chairman, decisions of how to apply that policy or what study is required to consider that official plan policy, like what street or neighborhood the proposed development is to be similar and compatible to, what neighborhood are we talking about? How big an area? What are we talking about? Are for town council to consider. Again, not in your job description. You have enough in your job description. And there's a bunch of other issues too attached to this, like the site plan itself, which is for town council to consider. I'm not even going to get to I'm not even going to talk about my concerns about the site plan itself and the location of where the new dwelling would be situated. Summarize it by saying, look, there's major exterior side yard beside this house to Hurricane and beside Dave Drago's. Probably because they're the last lot in the plan back in the day. And this house, not only being 10 feet from the existing one on its rear yard, would protrude well out to Hurricane. Well out to Hurricane. We're back to my front porch. Sitting on that porch, looking straight west down at exterior side yard, if this was all built the way it's proposed, I'll be looking at the east wall of the new house. Almost flush up against the existing one, not to its rear, but to its rear by 10 feet. Now, site-specific development issues like that are for council to consider. And because in my opinion, and I know the committee's got to decide for themselves, my opinion, the variance on the rear yard cannot be considered minor. It can't. The way to deal with this, if the applicant wants to pursue this, is an application for site-specific rezoning. So that the people who are in the right pay scale at council can consider all of the issues attached to it. Just like they attempted to do on the north side of Hurricane, where new houses are being built, just like they did, I believe, on the 2-unit beside the Anglican Church on Pelham Street, now being constructed. There's site-specific zoning on them, it appears. Now, Mr. Chairman, you got to summarize things. Go try. What I'm submitting to the committee is that the minor variance related to the rear yard at 23 Chestnut Street, that's your file A7, is not minor and therefore should be denied. Given, Mr. Chairman, that the other concurrent application of this committee, which is the consent application number B6, and the other variance file A6, that's the one dealing with the accessory garage and the slight reduction in the lot area from the zoning requirements, can't be considered for approval unless the rear yard reduction for 23 Chestnut is approved. That domino thing I was talking about, they're concurrent. Because of that, I submit that the committee also should deny those concurrent applications. It's a package. I also submit to the committee that should the applicant, and I don't know the applicant at all, should he wish to pursue this proposal further or something similar, the proper approach is, and should have been from the start, to file a site-specific zoning amendment to the town. To council, in essence. The council being the authority that can review, they can interpret, and they can change if it's deemed appropriate. Official plan policies and zoning bylaw regulations as may be required. You're not in that position. Now, I'm going to stop there. The Secretary Treasurer already told me that she is going to provide me with a notice of the committee decision. I'm hoping, Mr. Chairman, and Sarah can confirm this, that would include any notice of an adjournment by this committee on this matter, in case you want to think about it further for a future meeting, so that we would know when that is and we can participate. I also want to say, Mr. Chairman, that if this does come to a site-specific zoning amendment, well, I'll be there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. We do have one third registered speaker this evening, and that is Miss Patty Tomczyk. And I would welcome Patty to the stand.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'll try not to repeat concerns already expressed. However, I have three simple concerns and they're fairly basic. The first is the role of any municipal government is to represent the community and the members of that community, not to reach decisions that facilitate development, that minimize the cost of that development, or that make the developer's job easy by amending or exempting them from bylaw requirements that are in existence. So based on that alone, I'm not really sure why this would proceed. My other concerns are regarding the fact that we're here to discuss, yet again, development at one site as opposed to the overall impact on the community. We've had flooding problems in the area very recently. We continue to have flooding problems at Fonthill Yards. And my storm sewers, I live at 6 Hurricane Road, have been replaced twice in the last 3 years. So you can say that this one amendment, this one change isn't going to make a significant impact. But I suggest to you that we need to look at these on a more comprehensive scale, both for flooding concerns and also for fire concerns. The previous presenter talked about two-story homes 10 feet apart. The homes around them are century homes. They were not built with fire retardant materials, as would normally be expected in a higher density neighborhood. Easily, with the mature trees surrounding these buildings, they could take out half the block. Is the fire department being consulted? Are they prepared to deal with a fire of that magnitude? I suggest that, while I don't have a lot of scientific facts and figures, it's common sense that if you build a property like what's being proposed, we increase density, we increase flooding. We take down trees, we increase flooding. We remove lawns, we increase flooding. In this particular design, that entire new build will be surrounded by concrete and patio. There's very little lawn or trees remaining. The town trees that won't be touched, according to the developer's representative, they will die. Because if you drive bulldozers over the roots of them, they will disappear in fairly short order. I'm just suggesting that these requests are coming far too often in front of us. Not very long ago, we were here discussing 3 Hurricane. Now we're here discussing 26 Chestnut. One of my neighbors on Lorimer has already been approached for a similar plan to this one. She's been asked to sever half her backyard so that a new home can be built in her rear yard. Now, luckily, she's not interested, but you're going to see many of these. So while you might say that we're just looking at this one case, we are not. We need a comprehensive view of that area of town. And you only have to look to the city of Welland to understand that they had serious flooding problems down Clare Avenue from exactly this type of approach. And again, thank you for your time. And I just want to remind you that to the best of my knowledge, no one from the community is speaking out in favor of this. And your job is really to represent us, not to facilitate things or make them easier or cheaper for someone developing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For you, Mr. Chair, I would now open up to the floor and the in-person gallery. If there's anyone here that would like to make comments, you're welcome to attend the podium and make your comments using the microphone. Please do state your name for the record, if you will.
Pardon?
If you could just state your name.
Robert
record.
Edward McCauley.
Thank you.
I live on 25 Chestnut Street. I have a century home. We've got a nice backyard. We keep our place clean. Keep it we got beautiful flowers and stuff. We moved there 15 years ago, and we just don't want this happening. We've had so much construction across from us on Hurricane Road, and the traffic is bad there, very bad. I used to, well, I hit there the other day getting my mail because these construction guys are on the road and they've moved the trailers finally. But it's, if I have to go to petition, go to every house in this bloody town, I'll go there and we'll get this damn thing stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And is there anyone else from the public that would like to make verbal comments? Oh, sorry, Jody. And if you could please state your name for the record.
I'm Victoria McCauley. I live on 25 Chestnut. I do have a question. If they sever this land to 2 in half, what stops them from selling that last piece? And then we have a wedged in. Anybody can come along and do it again. Any developer who wants to develop land in a small area will sever half that street, or maybe even all of it, and then sell half or sell both. We don't have the road construction for that. We've got to make a stand. And as for the trees, oh, nothing's going to get hurt. We just lost the landmark, a beautiful evergreen. When they did the road construction and all that for the plumbing in on the north side of Hurricane, a wind came along and blew it down. That thing probably was 50, 60 years old. It was a beautiful pine that was the crooked ones, the ones that, beautiful. It was a landmark. Even my grandchildren called it a landmark. We lost it. If we don't stop, we're going to lose all of our green. Where's the green belt going to be? Where's the home where people can sit? We're going to have another concrete jungle where all we have is these high-rise buildings. I, for one, don't want to be here when that happens. There was one other question. Now I can't remember what it was. If I think of it before I leave, I'll come up again. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
And is there anyone else? Yes, thank you.
Please, if you have something to share, by all means.
Hi, my name is Erin Keenan. I feel a little awkward speaking today.
Sorry, did you say Aaron or?
Erin,
Aaron,
yes.
thank you.
I am currently actually one of the residents at 26 Chestnut. And this is the proposal at that property. I'm of two minds of speaking today, to be very honest, because I don't know if I feel like I have a right to have an opinion because I do not own the land in question. But I guess my feeling is that just because something on paper has a possibility of being completed doesn't mean it should. I have been at that property and fallen in love with that property. I look out on that property from my bedroom window, and I have looked at the proposed outline of what is going to be built. And the lot itself, from what I understand, is less than what should be allowed. The size is not exactly up to standard. And the density between the accessory unit and the dwelling space actually does use up quite a percentage of that lot. It might not on paper seem like a lot, but having overlooked that parcel for some time now, it will be quite a dense use of that space. There may be 7.5 meters allowable at the backside of that for what they're saying is going to be a rear yard on the proposed dwelling. However, how wide is it really? It's a postage stamp to actually make it passable. It's not really a rear yard, so neither the existing dwelling nor the proposed new dwelling will have any kind of rear yard to speak of. That rear yard is, as one of the other gentlemen already spoke to, where you live so much of your life. It is what actually makes that property beautiful. They're proposing that the side yard and the front yard are passable as utilizable space to be a replacement for a rear yard. But one of the things, and it might be small to some, but it's not actually, if you're looking to replace utilizable space, is the trees that line that property along that, would it be north side, Hurricane Road side, and Chestnut frontage are actually coniferous. They're largely coniferous. Those lawns are just littered with pine needles. Nothing grows there. There is no yard. The beautiful yard that is enjoyable on that property is all at the back. When you want to sit somewhere, when you want to be somewhere, when you want to enjoy that space, it's all in the backyard. There is nothing pretty about the front yard or the side yard. It's all at the back. My bedroom is the one that overlooks the backyard. And I'm sorry, but no one wants to look out at a wall because that is all that's going to be left of the view, which is now this stunning, beautiful, probably many year old tree, which will be demolished. And it's just, is it possible to do? Probably, but should it be done? No, in my humble opinion. My humble opinion means nothing. There is so much to consider. Like, that home is become my home. The people in that neighborhood, it's a fabulous neighborhood. Like Dave, he speaks to us through the fence. But yeah, he just speaks over the fence. And then there's Cheryl, who's become a wonderful friend to our other side. And the neighborhood is wonderful. And they embraced us. And everyone smiles and waves as you drive down the street. And it's a neighborhood. It's a great group of people. And I guess I just didn't feel like I couldn't not come today and just stand up and say, there is something that will be changed by putting this in place in that neighborhood. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not a great public speaker. I'm Cheryl LaPalm and I live at 24 Chestnut. So on the left side of Aaron and Blue, who I've become very good friends with. My golden retrievers and I do not agree with this proposal at all, for obvious reasons. I can go on, but everyone has already made points on why this should not happen. We live in a wonderful old neighborhood. I moved here 8 years ago and it's changing because it needs to evolve, and I understand that, but this is, I find self-serving in my opinion and unnecessary. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to attend the podium to make public comments? Okay, seeing none, I'm just going to check the email address to see if we've received anything during. Thank you. We have not. Through you, Mr. Chair, you may wish to turn the floor over to the applicant or agent to see if they have any response to the public comments.
Any questions from anyone on our side?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to, before we close the public portion, I would just ask the agent or applicant if they had any further comments before we move on.
Sure.
Through the chair, just briefly, I know change can be hard for a lot of neighbors to palate. You know, the reality is that, you know, additional people would like to live in this neighborhood. The federal government's bringing in new immigrants. They have to live somewhere. And not that this is necessarily immigrants, but there is an acute housing shortage. You know, neighborhoods are living things and they're evolving over time. So it's you know, these are the decisions that we're faced with year by year, and Pelham is not immune to that. I do not have anything further to say other than that, you know, the public interest is oftentimes broader than what the immediate neighbors may like to think it is. We also, the committee and council, the province is, you know, has jurisdiction, and that municipal approval authorities must be making decisions in the public interest under Section 2 of the Planning Act. And that includes people who do not have a voice yet and who would potentially like to live here or haven't been born yet. So I just would leave that with the committee to.
Thank you. And before we close the public portion, I will just do one last call for public speakers from the floor. Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, it is 5:45 p.m. and you may now close the public portion and move to committee input.
Oh.
Sorry, is there someone? Sorry.
Sorry, Bruce. You remembered your question. Okay.
Oh, sorry, Victoria McCully again. We need to know what's going to happen with on Chestnut Street. Those are inadequate sewer drainage. It is. Sure. We just had that major rainstorm and it washed out the corner guys. What do you call it, huh? Storm drains. What did they do? They put stone in there. It's not going to help the situation. So that street, for any more construction on it, it's not going to work. Plus, every time they do construction, these old homes, basement problems. It shook my house, our house. And we got cracks now we have to fill. So who's going to do that? We have to. So you got to really think about the whole layout out here, not just one building, how it affects the whole street. And all the old homes that are on it, especially the 4 nearby. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank
With
you.
that being said, is there any last public speakers before we move on? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It is 5:46 PM and we have now closed the public portion to move to committee input. And I would just remind the committee that we do have our technical staff available if there's any questions or concerns.
Through you, Mr. Chair, would fall in the category of a technical question for planning staff. I am still new to this committee. The difference between an application to us for a variance and, as one of the speakers mentioned, a site-specific zoning has apparently happened on Hurricane. Maybe I just get a clarification on when one is used and when another is.
Sorry, Ms. Beans, can you turn on your microphone? No, it's not. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, we'll try this one. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the property that was on the north side of Hurricane Road where they created 4 lots, that one went through a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment versus a minor variance. And so, you know, that was the decision of the applicant at that time. Oftentimes when we meet with people, we encourage them to do zoning bylaw amendments versus site or versus minor variance. But when we receive an application, we do have to process it. So the decision is really up with the applicant as to how they would like to proceed. We give them advice as to what is the best approach. And so sometimes, you know, they will go for a minor variance versus a zoning bylaw amendment, and other times a minor variance is an appropriate mechanism. So there's no really hard and fast rule in terms of when we want a zoning bylaw amendment versus a minor variance, but you know, they have to be satisfied and the committee needs to be satisfied that the 4 tests can be met in each variance application. Otherwise, then the committee would, if you're not satisfied, you would render a decision against the minor variance. And I think, if I may, the property across the road, that was 3 Hurricane, where they created the 4 lots. They went through a zoning bylaw amendment primarily because the 4th lot is to the rear and it's what is referred to as a flag lot. And the zoning bylaw doesn't really provide for that in terms of, and so they created a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment to allow for that, what we refer to as a flag lot in the back.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you. If you had thought a site-specific zoning bylaw would be more appropriate, would that be included in the guidance that you provided this committee?
Mr. Chair, we've done our evaluation on these applications as if they are a minor variance. And so we have done our evaluation, and from a staff perspective, we are satisfied with them. The things that you evaluate for a zoning bylaw amendment are slightly different than you would for minor variance. For example, a zoning bylaw amendment, you look at land use compatibility and conformity with the official plan, but you don't have the same 4 tests with a zoning bylaw amendment that you would have with the minor variance. Oftentimes, it's harder to achieve a zoning or minor variance because the 4 tests are so narrow in focus. And And so it's a pretty high standard to achieve in order to get approval for a minor variance because the tests are so specific. Whereas the test for a zoning bylaw amendment can be more broadly applied and it's primarily related to land use compatibility and conformity with the official plan and, you know, other planning policies.
Brenda, any questions? I think from, from my perspective, we've heard a lot this evening, from both sides and, from obviously the applicant and the community. And I think there's, a number of different areas that may still have some questions marks. I think that's kind of very, very noticeable at this point from my perspective. For me, I do think that there are a couple of things that have come up that might need to be reconsidered. And the reason I'm saying that is because if we are to be here to judge on a minor variance, when I hear the backyard situation, really from 7.5 meters to 1.3, really doesn't sound minor to me. And that plays into the whole second and third application to group that all together. So where I'm not as comfortable is if we approve that first one, that will allow the second and third to kind of be active. And I hope I'm saying this right, guys, but that's just from my opinion. So unless you guys can help me understand a little bit better about why you didn't go to the zoning amendment, maybe you guys can add something like, why not go through the zoning amendment progress instead of just coming here with what seems to be not so minor. I could understand somebody going from 7.5 meters to maybe 5.5 meters, very reasonable. But in this case, like, there is no backyard on that other property. Once you make this decision, we make this decision.
To the chair. The reason this wasn't brought to council, these types of applications, it overwhelmingly met the criteria for not needing to go to municipal council. And in my opinion, staff had the same opinion, and oftentimes a lot of other municipal planning departments have similar opinions. And sometimes when these applications go to council, although there can be a lot of public involvement in it, some councils will ask, why was this even brought to us? Because it's something normally that they wouldn't get involved with, considering the scale. One of the things I can offer, our client was not interested in changing the land use. Zoning bylaw amendments are oftentimes brought in with more gravity. So if a zoning bylaw amendment were submitted, now all of a sudden the uses can be brought into question and be considered by council. For instance, townhouses, whereas adding townhouses as a use is not in the Committee of Adjustments jurisdiction, it is in council's jurisdiction, and it would be open under a zoning bylaw amendment application. The other thing I'd like to mention is that, and it came up earlier, complying with the lot area and the rear yard setback is possible with the lot being moved and that existing house being removed. So in the event that the rear yard setback is refused, our client could potentially rebuild that house in accordance with the zoning bylaw closer to the intersection, a brand new house that would comply with the zoning, and a severance of which that would also satisfy all the requirements of the zoning. So there are consequences to these decisions that the committee should be aware of. Yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
No, thank you for kind of clarifying that. I just wanted to understand kind of the logic as to why and how. Now, any other questions on the panel? I think we're good. Okay. So, anyone like to make a motion?
Well, I'll make the motion.
Right?
With regard to the first file B5 2023P, 26 Chestnut Street, Pelham. It's an application for consent, partial discharge of mortgage, and consent to convey Part 1. Move that we grant this, subject to the following conditions. To the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works, a lot grading drainage plan be submitted, confirmation that no utilities cross the proposed lot line, that they obtain a driveway and entrance culvert permit as applicable, and to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning, conduct a stage 1 to 2 archaeological assessment. To the satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer, provide the Secretary Treasurer with a registrable legal description, a copy of the deposited reference plan, and a final certification fee of $423 be provided. This motion is based on the following reasons. The application conforms to and complies with the town official plan, regional policy plan, provincial policy statement, and the town's zoning bylaw. This decision is rendered having regard to sections 51 sub 24 and 51 sub 25 of the Planning Act. And the committee has considered all written and oral submissions and finds that subject to the conditions, this application meets Planning Act criteria and is consistent and complies with provincial, regional, and town planning policy.
And I second that motion.
Three, Mr. Mayor, the motion is now on the floor for a vote.
All in favor? I abstain. Yes, 2 yeses and I abstained. Yes, I did not vote for the motion.
Thank you, three, Mr. Chair. We will now move on to consider the 2 associated minor variance files, and these files will be heard concurrently. I will now read my presentation with respect to the minor variance files. Applications for minor variance files A6 2023P and A7 2023P, 26 Chestnut being parts 1 and parts 2. The subject land is located on the south side of Hurricane Road, lying west of Chestnut Street, known locally as 26 Chestnut. The applications seek relief from A6 being section 3.1E lot coverage accessory uses to permit a maximum lot coverage of 20% of the lot area for all accessory buildings, whereas the bylaw allows 10%. Section 6.2.2 minimum lot area to permit a minimum lot area of 350 meters squared, whereas the bylaw requires 360. A7/2023P requests relief from section 6.2.2 minimum rear yard, seeking minimum setback of 1.2 meters, whereas 7.5 meters is required. To date, the following comments have been received. Building divisions seek conditions. Public Works, town is not supportive of the following sections. Sorry, when I say town, I mean engineering is not supportive of the following sections. Section 3.1E lot coverage accessory uses. Section 6.2.2 minimum rear yard. There are utilities in front of the proposed driveway. The water services for the new lot will be from the existing water main at the intersection of Chestnut and Hurricane. The service should be a minimum 2 inches with tracer wire and can be installed in the road allowance behind the curb. Hydro 1, no comments or concerns. Again, 5 public comments were received at the time of writing this report. I will read those again as summarized. Oppose the consent and variances. Suggest second dwelling unit would be more appropriate for the site. Additional concerns relating to negative impacts of reduced lot area, setbacks, coverage, negative impacts on the character of the neighborhood, compatibility related to the overbuild of the site, scale of the proposed dwelling, privacy and overlook on neighboring properties. Number of variances does not respect the intent of the zoning bylaw. Concerns relating to scale and density, intensification of the surrounding area. Proposal does not meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act. Retained lot will not maintain a carport or private garage. Snow storage and potential impacts on neighboring properties and the integrity of existing cedars and fence. Light and noise impacts on the heritage/character of the surrounding neighborhood. Concern that it will be precedent setting. Concerns relating to character and compatibility of the proposal with the surrounding neighborhood. Variances associated with the consent are not minor in nature. Removal of trees, traffic impacts on Hurricane Road, character and stability of the existing neighborhood, concerns related to parking on the public road, drainage along Hurricane Road. With respect to the 4 minor variance tests, test 1 being, is the variance minor in nature? With respect to lot coverage accessory uses, yes, the increased lot coverage is minimal given the lot and surrounding urban context. It is noted the accessory building is located on the same footprint as the existing accessory building. No expansion to the footprint is proposed. With respect to minimum lot area, yes, the reduction is approximately 2.8%. The proposed reduced lot area is adequate size for a single detached dwelling and accessory structure. It is not so significant that a dwelling cannot be comfortably sited on the proposed lot, and the reduction does not result in adverse impact on the functionality of the site. With respect to minimum rear yard, yes, the site maintains a generous landscaped amenity space. Additionally, the exterior side yard is fenced and there will be a tree buffer along the street edge, providing privacy for the area to function as an amenity space for the dwelling. For the second test, is the variance desirable for the development or use of the land? With respect to lot coverage accessory uses, yes, it will permit design flexibility for the site and allow for the footprint of the existing accessory building to be maintained. It will not result in shadowing on adjacent properties, will allow for the continued use of the rear yard as private amenity space, and will not alter the function of the subject property. With respect to minimum lot area, yes, the requested variance will facilitate a consent that is aligned with the objectives of the town's official plan. The reduction in lot area is not anticipated to have a substantial impact on the surrounding area and is generally compatible with lot areas in the surrounding neighborhood. With respect to minimum rear yard, yes, the requested variance is not anticipated to have a significant negative impact on the streetscape or adjacent properties, as the existing dwelling will be maintained. The reduction to the rear yard setback in this instance is desirable, as appropriate private amenity space will be maintained on the site in the exterior side yard. With respect to the third test, does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? With respect to lot coverage accessory uses, yes, the requested variance would not negatively impact the character of the area. The variances would allow established conditions to continue and facilitate compatible residential development. With respect to minimum lot area, yes, the variance maintains the intent of the bylaw, as the lot will continue to allow for a single detached residential dwelling on a residentially zoned lot. With respect to minimum rear yard, yes, the property will maintain a generous side yard amenity space and reasonable separation for the proposed dwelling on part 1. With regard to the reduced rear yard, lot grading and drainage requirements are recommended as a condition of approval for the proposed development. With respect to the last test, does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the official plan? With respect to lot coverage accessory uses, yes, the subject land use is within the permitted use of the urban living area or built boundary designation and will not impact the application's ability to meet the intent and purpose of the official plan as it relates to the provision of 1 additional dwelling unit in the urban living area built boundary. With respect to minimum lot area, yes, the proposed accessory building and dwelling are generally compatible with and generally in keeping with the low density residential character of the neighborhood. The proposal is generally consistent with the existing built form, scale, and massing with existing development and character of the area. With respect to minimum rear yard, yes, the variance will facilitate appropriate redevelopment and intensification within an existing residential neighborhood and does not conflict with any of the policies subject to the demonstration of appropriate urban design and fulfillment of the proposed conditions of approval, including a lot grading and drainage plan. Planning staff are the opinion the proposal makes efficient use of the land, will not result in the overbuilding of the property, will not alter the view, sightlines, or personal enjoyment of the subject property or neighboring properties, and should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regard to land use and compatibility, traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. Planning staff do note that Public Works has expressed concern with the proposal. In order to satisfy Public Works concerns, appropriate approvals are required, including a comprehensive grading and drainage plan, demonstrating that stormwater runoff will not negatively impact the neighboring properties. In this regard, staff recommend that application A6/2023P and A7/2023P be approved, subject to the following conditions. That the applicant obtain all necessary building and demolition permits prior to construction commencing. That the applicant obtain a driveway entrance and culvert permit from the Public Works Department for the construction of all new or modification of existing driveways and entrances. Installation and or modification of all entrances shall be completed in accordance with town standards. That each lot is to be individually serviced, a water and sanitary sewer lateral in accordance with the Town of Pelham engineering standards. Installation of any missing services will require a temporary works permit obtained through the Public Works Department. These works are to be completed prior to consent, and the applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Locate cards are to be provided to the town once works are complete. That town staff will require a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan demonstrating that stormwater runoff will not negatively impact nor rely neighboring properties to the satisfaction of Public Works. That any street trees removed will be replaced by the applicant in accordance with the town's tree management policy and to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works. That the applicant prepare and submit a site servicing plan to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works or their designate. And that the approval of the minor variances A6 and A7 are subject to final certification of consent file B5/2023P. And again, if you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact myself in writing, sleach@pelham.ca. And if you have made verbal comments today or public comments, we will send you a copy of the notice. Thank you to you, Mr. Chair. You may wish to see if the applicant has any further comments.
Please, any other comments?
Thank you. That does bring us to the public portion of the meeting. I will again call upon our pre-registered members if they have any further comments related to the variances. First, we have David Drago.
Regarding the nature and extent of relief or permission applied for 3.1E lot coverage accessory uses. Subsection 45 of the Planning Act sets out 4 statutory tests which must be considered by the committee and satisfied by the applicant before an application for zoning variance can succeed. It is important to note that if the application fails any one of the 4 tests while passing the other 3, then the Planning Act requires that the application must fail. Concerning the application for relief from section 3.1E lot coverage accessory units, I propose that the application and the Town of Pelham planning recommendation lack sufficient evidence for this zoning variance to be deemed minor and as such succeed. The planning recommendation bases its determination that it is a minor variance on the following argument. Quote, the variance is required as a result of the proposed consent. No expansion to the footprint of the accessory building is proposed. And, quote, there have been no complaints with regards to the accessory building in the past. As such, it is the opinion of staff, the variance is minor in nature. This reasoning is baffling at best. The variance requested is not about the accessory building, but about the lot coverage of the accessory building. The application asks for the requirement to be doubled from its required 10%. Of course, there has been no complaints in the past with regard to the accessory building. It has always been a garage, taking up less than the required percentage of the lot at 26 Chestnut Street. The planning recommendation says it's minor in nature because there have been no complaints in the past. There was no reason to complain in the past. It met the requirements of the existing bylaw, regulating lot coverage for accessory uses. The planning recommendations argument for being minor is illogical. Regarding the test of desirability, the planning recommendation states, quote, "The requested variance is appropriate and desirable as it will not result in shadowing on adjacent properties, will allow for the continued use of rear yard as private amenity space, and will not alter the function of the subject property." This argument does not consider the intent of the applicant as stated in the justification brief, that this may become a second dwelling unit, which would then further impose upon the privacy of the rear amenity, including deck and backyard patio space at the abutting property at 24 Chestnut Street, directly to the west of the subject lands. 26 Chestnut Street is a rental unit. The justification plan indicates that it may convert the accessory unit on the new lot to a rental unit. I ask you, committee, are 2 rental units desirable when abutting a single property? It is argued, therefore, the application for this variance fails 1, if not 2, of the 4 tests. It is neither minor nor is it desirable. That application fails. Similarly, the application for variance of section 6.2.2 minimum lot area does not pass the 4 test, despite what the applicant's justification brief and the planning recommendation say. Minimum lot area is a requirement in every residential zone in the town of Pelham. While I was told that it's not about numbers and percentages, the planning department has chosen to justify its approval by crunching numbers. I quote the planning recommendation. Quote, "Yes, the variance is minor in nature. The variance requests a minimum lot area of 350 meters squared, whereas 360 meters squared is required." And in bold, a reduction of approximately 2.8%. The proposed reduced lot area is an adequate size for a single detached dwelling and accessory structure. The variance is considered minor as it is, quote, "not so significant that a dwelling cannot comfortably be sited on the proposed lot, and the reduction of 10 meters squared, converted 107 feet, does not result in an adverse impact on the functionality of the site." As such, it is the opinion of staff that the proposed variance is minor in nature. Again, I reveal the inconsistencies in the planning department's use of percentages and numbers, qualifying them with statements like not so significant. At what point is the variance significant? Does it depend on the applicant? The law is the law. Or is it not? Or is it merely a suggestion? It appears as though the planning department in the town of Pelham will employ numbers and percentages to justify their approvals, but neglect numbers and percentages when they are used in opposing arguments. For this reason, the application and the planning department have not provided sufficient reasoning to conclude that this is a minor variance. Concerning the test of desirability, the planning recommendation states, quote, "The requested variance is desirable for the development or use of the land. The requested variance will facilitate a consent that is aligned with the objectives of the town's official plan." I asked the committee, I quote, "Is it desirable to violate the application of the zoning bylaw section 1.3 by allowing a reduction of requirements, knowing full well that the comprehensive zoning bylaw is a direct product of the town's official plan?" This section of the bylaw survived careful scrutiny and remained intact in the new comprehensive zoning bylaw 4481/2022. Why would one allow it to be changed for a whimsical, inappropriate development? Why is the applicant not made to reduce the size of his building to satisfy our town's bylaws? For these reasons, this variance is major and is undesirable. The application fails. Pertaining to A7 2023 P. Concerning the application for relief from section 6.22, minimum rear yard, seeking a minimum setback of 1.2 meters, whereas 7.5 meters is required. The planning recommendation states, quote, "Yes, the variance is minor in nature." Quote, "There is no precise definition or mathematical equation as to what constitutes minor." Quote, "Minor is a relative term." I repeat, a relative term to be based on the individual circumstances of each application and lends itself to the degree of impact. The variance requests a reduction to 1.2 meters from the required 7.5 meters, end of quote. While the planning department does not convert this, I will. 7.5 meters equals 24 feet, 7.27 inches. 1.2 meters is 3 feet, 11.244 inches. This is a reduction of 84% of the requirement stated and maintained in the zoning bylaw. How in anyone's world is this considered to be relative and minor? 84%. By comparison, 26 Chestnut Street will have a backyard that is a mere 5 inches wider than the counter on my kitchen island. Good luck enjoying a Cayman kettle of beer in that backyard.
Sir, just on that point, okay? I appreciate the comments you're making, but please just convey the information.
I am.
Feel the anger, you know?
No, it's not anger.
I just want you to keep in mind, everyone here is trying to.
Yes,
just
I
hear-
understand that.
just-
It's not anger.
We can hear your point.
Yeah,
There's no need to really, yell.
emphasize my point. Okay,
That's all. I'm just
That's okay.
for
I'm
everybody's.
I'm
it's-
almost
no,
finished.
It's okay. You
I'm
please
almost finished.
take as long as you want. I just think it's
Yeah.
fair that
I
we hear you.
I
okay? We
did that
hear
when I taught Shakespeare
you.
as well.
No problem. No problem.
Declaring that the term minor is a relative term to be interpreted is a very, very dangerous interpretation of the law. If laws are relative, then the town has lost all of its objectivity and consistency when applying them. I guarantee the committee that this statement will haunt the town for generations. It will only serve to awaken suspicions of unfair approvals and denials. Numbers are numbers, laws are laws. For this reason, the application fails.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I would just ask Mr. Miller if he had any further comments to make.
A question of clarity in terms of process tonight. I assume this file, and what number is it, Sarah?
Right now, we're considering A6 and A7 concurrently.
And you're dealing with both
Yes.
variance files concurrently.
Correct.
All right, then I have something to say.
Sorry?
Mr. Chairman, committee. To use a baseball analogy, it's crunch time. I'm going to focus, Mr. Chair, on the rear yard variance application. And I don't know how to do that except repeat and emphasize what I said before. So that when you consider what is file A7, you'll realize why I'm recommending to you that you deny it, because in no world is it minor. So I'm going to do that. Indulge me to kind of repeat myself, but because it's crunch time, I think we have to do that. Remember what is being proposed here. Proposal is to sever the entire rear yard of the existing century dwelling, the entire rear yard, to create a new building lot for proposed two-story dwelling. Given the small footprint that you could put on there, it has to be 2 stories, I suspect. And that's what is portrayed to us. A new building lot for a 2-story dwelling fronting on Hurricane. The entire rear yard. Rear yard that's been there for decades. The lot itself was about 60 by 60. It's small, but that's what the current zoning bylaw calls for, a little undersized, which Mr. Drago just talked about. Now, I repeat, if you go to the rear wall of the existing house and you draw a line 7.5 meters to the west and parallel to the rear wall of that house, that is the required rear yard under the zoning bylaw. Required. Without the reduction or elimination of that rear yard requirement, without the reduction or elimination of it, however you do it, it isn't possible to create a building lot anywhere close to the size required by the zoning bylaw. Remember my analogy. The applications here are like dominoes. I haven't played dominoes in a long time, but anyway, they're like dominoes. If this variance isn't minor, and that's my opinion and strong, and is denied, then the other applications can't fly. The planning department, in their review, said, and again, I'm summarizing, it's dangerous to do that, but I'm going to do it. The mathematical reduction, 7.5 meters to 1.2 meters, isn't necessarily the measure to consider. Rather, everything is okay. There's really no impact because there's existing landscaped amenity space elsewhere on the property. And there's reference to the exterior side yard. Exterior side yard, got a tree canopy on it. You recall that's what I look at with sitting my family on the porch. Now, I reminded the committee, a rear yard is so much more than just amenity space. Oh, I love my rear yards for my anoronic chairs and sitting back there, and that's important. You remember my analogy of a breather. Well, it's a breather for the people who live there. One of them was here tonight. Didn't know that. But it's also a breather, and equally, maybe even more important, it's a breather between buildings, a forced substantial breather between buildings. Think about that. In a lot of cases, not all, that breather between buildings is a double required backyard because it's backyard to backyard in many subdivisions. That's not what's happening here, but a breather between buildings. And yes, also a place for the natural environment to breathe. And I'm glad nobody's laughing at this because some of my design people used to. But I called them a breather. It makes sense. Let's focus on that building separation, that breather. The product of approving this minor variance and the other applications that are concurrent will be a 2-story dwelling separated by less than 10 feet. Less than 10 feet. In what is currently the required rear yard for 23 Chestnut. Wow. Mr. Chairman, I repeat, that isn't a minor change to council's approved and thought out rear yard requirement in the zone. Not a minor change. And I told you before, and I submitted again, the only body that can change a rear yard requirement like that is council. Council. And they would do it when they consider the overall development proposal with all the issues attached to it. Does it make sense? That's beyond the role of this committee, beyond your pay scale. And that's why I submit to you, after looking at bylaws and situations like this for way too many decades, the committee should find this variance application as not minor, not acceptable relief that this committee can grant, and deny it. And what happens is that domino effect takes place. If that file is denied, the other should have been denied. Frankly, I wish this file would have been dealt with first. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm recommending that it's not minor. You deny it. And what that would force then, if the applicant wants to pursue this application, or a slightly different one, whatever, make an application to City Council for a site-specific rezoning, where all of the issues attached to this are considered openly with the neighborhood and in front of the decision makers at the rate pay scale. I think that's clear. The final thing, this is a question of process. And although I know the answer, I think that the neighbors here should understand this. You know, Mr. Chairman, members, there's been changes to the planning process and act from the great minds at Queen's Park over the last few years. Lots of them. One of the changes from the way it used to be is the appeal procedures for decisions of a committee of adjustment. So, Sarah, I asked this question of the planners a couple of weeks ago, and they got the answer from you. If the committee was to approve, and I'll focus on file A7, the minor variance for the rear yard, under the current rules set up by, as I say, the great minds at Queen's Park, who can appeal that decision?
So the neighbors itself would not be entitled to appeal as persons. So the Planning Act, section 4512, in the case of the minor variance, states that an appeal may be filed by the applicant, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, or a specified person or a public body as defined by the Planning Act, section 11, within 20 days. And if you'd like, I can look up those definitions for clarity.
Well, no, if we can translate that so that my neighborhood understands. Not that long ago, if the committee was to approve an application and a neighbor was concerned about the decision, you could appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board, just like the applicant could if he wasn't happy with it.
That's correct.
What does this say for concerned neighbors now with the current rules?
They would not be entitled to appeal.
That's what I saw, and I knew it. What that means, Mr. Chairman and committee, is that what you're doing here tonight is crunch time. And my neighbors can't appeal your decision. So with that, I'll sit down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next public speaker was Patty. She did inform me that she couldn't stay past 6 p.m. So with that being said, I will now open to the gallery. If there's anyone here that would like to make additional public comments, you're welcome to attend the middle podium. And please do announce your name prior. Seeing none, I will just check the email address to see if we received any emails. For you, Mr. Chair, we've received no emails. However, before we close the public portion, I would just ask if the applicant or agent had any follow-up comments.
Through the chair. One of the things with, in the planning justification brief that I submitted and in my delegation earlier about this being a more technical variance is because of how front lot lines are defined. So the front lot line or the frontage is the shortest frontage, the shortest street line in the case of a corner lot. So in the effort of not trying to preserve the existing house that largely everybody would like to see remain, by moving that lot line over whatever it is, a meter to comply with the lot area, we potentially would be changing the definition of what the front lot line is. In other words, the front lot line very easily would become Hurricane Road. And then in that case, what is the rear yard that we're all going on about for the last long while would actually be a side yard. So again, there are implications to these things. And my client and I, we talked a lot about at the beginning about what is the best development plan here, what site plan makes the most sense. In an effort to just blindly comply with zoning regulations, we end up with contrived lot geometry where you get random jogs to meet the definitions. But what that does is that's not necessarily functional. Like it doesn't provide usable yards, usable building envelopes. It skews a lot of things. But so, our office, we're big proponents of doing the right thing and not just contriving lot geometry or development proposals simply for the purposes of meeting definitions and avoiding the public process, because we believe in doing what's right and what's best for the neighborhood. So that's how we got the lot geometry we have today in an effort to keep that house up. And lastly, if I may, just to there's been a lot of shots fired at the town planning staff's regards about numeric deviations and bylaws. I think where that's coming from is that the tribunal or the OMB has consistently provided case law that the numeric deviation in minor variance applications is not particularly helpful for municipal approval authorities in evaluating land use compatibility. I think that's where it's coming from. So that concludes my remarks.
So just before we sit down, I just have a question offhand here because I'm thinking about what you just mentioned. So what you talked about was basically right siding the house, putting the front door at Hurricane, which means you'd have 3.5 meters at the backyard and then 1 meter on the side. So that was always, so you've looked at many options in terms of how would you use up this space. You've kind of looked at your various options, including the proposed severed lot, right? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to double check that. Yes.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Couple of questions. The proposed accessory building, you're proposing the same footprint as the existing, even though it's going to intrude onto the backyard space of the new dwelling. I'm just wondering why you're in love with that footprint, the existing footprint versus a smaller garage, still usable, but a bigger backyard.
Through the chair, I'll let my client chime in here if I missed anything, but I believe by providing that small extension on the front is to actually allow for a car to fit in the garage because of the orientation of that garage. And when we originally made this application, we were operating under the previous bylaw, which actually explicitly stated that that was a requirement. So, I mean, that's its origination. And then the small canopy off the side is in an effort to improve the rear yard amenity area for the new lot.
That's a good question. So I mean, part of buying that property in the first place was how beautiful that garage was. It's got a tall ceiling, it's a nice space, and it helps privatize one property from the other, from the south neighbor. There's quite a large house to the south that has a porch, and that accessory structure sort of draws a straight line in the sand in terms of giving some privacy to the separate properties for amenity space. So if you are going to sit out on your deck and drink a Cayman Kettle beer, you can do that without being accused of being an alcoholic. But so although we're talking about preserving the footprint, preserving the garage in its entirety with some small additions will make that overall development more attractive development for somebody living in that space. Actually, coincidentally, I didn't realize until just recently, but my original house, my first house I bought as my family was on a 60 by 60 lot in Welland. And we did some landscaping to add some amenity deck and shed and did similar things in terms of using structure to define privacy as opposed to trying to be dependent on landscape in itself.
Okay, and again, through you, Mr. Chair, the second question I have pertains to the existing building on Chestnut. What you're essentially proposing is that the usable green space is now going to move to the north. Are there how will they access that portion of the yard from the existing house?
Through the chair. So that would likely be the primary yard space, but there's also a restoration effort for the rear yard to the south, but alterations can be made to the existing dwelling at any point as well, with the benefit of a building permit.
I just have one quick question. So in terms of if Hurricane were considered to be the front yard, your side yard would be the sort of the new lot line. So the side yard under the bylaw is 1.2 meters. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we didn't officially close the public portion. So with that being said, I would just ask if anyone had any final comments before we officially close the public portion. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, it is 6:43 p.m. and we can officially close the public portion. If the committee has any further comments, now would be the time.
Please. Go ahead.
I have a question I think we have somebody from Public Works on the line.
That's correct. We have Mr. Young in the far right hand corner.
Okay, sorry. The memo you sent to Ms. Leach, April 21. Page 2, you under the heading Public Works offers the following comments. Town is not supportive of the following sections 3.1E lot coverage accessory uses. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're saying there.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The reason we're not supporting it is using the existing footprint of what's their garage now reduces the side yard setback. And with the trees on the western boundary, we feel it's almost impossible to get a swale down there without A, impacting the trees, or B, moving the building. We feel with the overdevelopment of this lot, there's no area for drainage. They can't get the swales to the front either way. You know, if you look at the building, the proposed dwelling itself, they have side access doors on the area where there's a 1.2 reduced side yard setback on the east side. But that access is elevated. So at some point, there's going to have to be stairs and a sidewalk to that point. There's no space for a swale to run down that section of the property. And with the trees and the existing garage that's going to be turned into an accessory structure with only a 1 meter setback, you won't be able to get a swale down there either, where we need 1.2 meters. Hence why Public Works do not support the 20% increase.
Good, thank you.
So in your opinion, what could be done to rectify that or deal with that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not the designer. That's not for me to come up with a solution for.
Okay. Thank you. all set. Anyone for a motion? Brenda?
Okay, so files A6 and A7, 2023P, 26 Chestnut Street, parts 1 and 2 in the town of Pelham. Application is made for minor variances for part 1, A6, 2023P, lot coverage for accessory uses of 20%, a minimum lot area of 350 square meters. And part 2, A7, 2023P, a minimum rear yard of 1.2 meters. The application is granted. The reasons are the variances are minor in nature as reduced lot area is still an adequate size for a single detached dwelling. No expansion of the existing accessory building footprint is proposed. Appropriate landscape amenity space is available on the lot. The intent of the zoning bylaw is maintained. The intent of the official plan is maintained. The proposal is desirable for the lands as it permits design flexibility. It preserves the existing house and the accessory structure to remain. Amenity space is available on the lot, and it facilitates a consent line that meets the intent of the town's. It facilitates a consent that meets the intent of the town's official plan. This application is granted without prejudice to any other application in the town of Pelham. The Committee of Adjustment considered the written and oral comments and agrees with the minor variance report analysis and recommendations that this application meets the Planning Act tests for minor variances. So for conditions, the necessary building and demolition permits are obtained. A driveway access and culvert permit is obtained. That each lot be individually serviced with a water and sanitary sewer lateral. Submit a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan. That any removed street trees be replaced. A site servicing plan be submitted, and that approval of A6 2022, A6 2023P and A7 2023P be subject to final certification of B5 2023P.
And I'll second that.
It's time for us to vote on the. Okay, all in favor?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like just to clarify the vote, if each member could verbalize their vote, just for the record, please.
I support the motion.
Thank you.
I do not support the motion. Do not.
Thank you.
I do support the motion.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, that does carry. Through Mr. Chair, that does bring us to adjournment, and I would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I second that motion.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, it is 6:49 PM and we have adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.